God's Word reminds us today of His compassion. We are in a series that I have sort of described as the things that we can do to beautify ourselves, both to be more attractive to each other, but also to God. Now, when you look through the lens of the law and you see loving God and loving neighbor, you can sort of say, this relates in a way, because we don't want to make ourselves beautiful superficially just so that we are attractive in some way that's not pleasing to the Lord or helpful in His kingdom, but we do things in a way to make ourselves become attractive both to God and to others. The gospel is not just God forgiving and doing all of the work for our salvation. There's a part of salvation, there's a part of the gospel that even for us means that we are wooing others. Now, that word wooing is not really used, so it feels a little bit dated, but can you come up with a word that describes our task as Christians in that way, that's represented by wooing? We are a part of God's wooing. Like I said, the scripture lesson today represents God's compassion. So, before I go on, I want to read to you, again just another version of that Nehemiah section, because it's so hard to catch in NRSV. I feel like there's plainer English that we can use. I'm going to read just verses 16 to 18. Are you with me? Hang on for this, and I want you to hear the last part of this especially. But they are ancestors. They became arrogant and stiff-necked, and they did not obey your commands. They refused to listen and failed to remember the miracles you performed among them. They became stiff-necked and in their rebellion appointed a leader in order to return to their slavery. But you are a forgiving God, gracious and compassionate, slow to anger and abounding in love. Therefore, you did not desert them. So, we know that God is compassionate. We call out for His compassion. The psalmist does it so many times. Psalm 51:1. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love. According to your great compassion, blot out my transgressions. Are you compassionate? Think in your mind of those whom you are compassionate toward. Get a mental image. It could be a bunch of people or groups of people. Okay? You got it? Now I want you to look around at each other and say, great job, you're doing it. Go ahead. I know it feels a little silly. But now, I want you to think about the person that you don't like. The person that you don't get along with. Think about, I want you to have that mental image of these things coming up on in your head, okay? Think about the groups of people who are just dumb. They have it all wrong. They come to the wrong conclusions. The ones who mess up our families, the ones who destroy our society, our government, our churches, our church, the ones who suffer and make their own lives, they suffer because they've done it to themselves. They make their own life horrible. It's their own fault. Did you have enough space? There's probably a lot more people in that group than the ones we congratulated ourselves on. So now I want you to look at each other and I want you to say this. What's that all about? Go ahead. What's that all about? Thank you. Thank you for humoring me this morning. What is that all about? We are are the people of love, God's love, and yet we have those things, categories in our life that we still create. Can we get away from those categories altogether? I sure hope so, but man, is it work. And if you can't recognize that that's true, that it is work, if that just magically happens for you, I have to resist saying one person that I really admire and love, and I think they just got this. I just really feel this spirit of compassion. I'll resist, but if you don't recognize it as work, I just check your pulse. Like something's wrong with you. You're amazing. Something is probably in that category, and for most of us, that category is bigger than the first one. And yet there are countless scriptures that call us to compassion, to love, but especially compassion. Now, I'm saying compassion because Nehemiah talks about it here in chapter 9. When there's a recognition that people have done something wrong and God still has compassion, that is a challenge. That's not just saying you love people that it's easy to love. That's not just loving the people that you already love. You know, we all sort of get caught up in these loops, right? You go through what you watch on YouTube, for example, right? What you watch on YouTube will feed you more of those same things, right? It will reinforce that loop. And we can get caught up in those reinforcing loops with our love. We can love people that are like us, that are easy to love. But God doesn't stop at the people that it's easy to love. God's love went to people that hurt him so deeply. Cut his relationship off with him. Performing miracle after miracle and expressing love after love and kindness and gentleness and patience. And then guess what? They still sin. And what does God do? He goes through the same cycle over and over again. Why? Because it's not just love, it's compassion. Compassion is a deep awareness and sympathy for another's suffering. It becomes something that's deeply felt. In this scripture in Colossians, there's actually two Greek words that's used to describe, that's translated as that one word, compassion. And you guys are aware of this, especially from the Old Testament. There's this idea of emotion coming from the bowels. There's something that's deep about it, and we think more of the heart now. Our culture has shifted in a way where we don't think of bowels of compassion anymore. Right? If you think of bowels, it's because you've got a virus, something's not right. And that's a whole other thing, right? But the bowels of compassion, it's a depth of love that's born out of an awareness of suffering. Because here's the thing. God recognizes the reality of our suffering even as we are in sin. God looks past something, doesn't he? He has to look past all of those categories that I said. The people that mess things up and it's their own fault, right? The people who want to destroy some things, right? God looks past that stupidity, ignorance, downright dumbness sometimes, right? I think most of the time it is ignorance. When we mess things up, and we don't see it, and we need some compassion from someone. Don't misunderstand compassion. Compassion is not having compassion on someone is not the ones that it's just natural and easy. Compassion is associated just as much with grace and mercy as it is with simply loving someone. It's deeply felt, born out of an awareness, though. How does God do it? Well, because he's all-knowing. Remember last week when we created that list? All-knowing ended up on that list, didn't it? There was a list that compared who God is, and then if we could display it, if we could sort of emulate it, if we could put it on, if we could imitate it, then we drew an arrow to the us category. and all-knowing, we couldn't do it. And yet we are challenged to listen, to be aware, to try to understand someone else's reality, someone else's world, someone else's perspective. We get caught up in pride, in needing, and I'll be the first to raise my hand, in needing to be understood myself. Oh, instead of understanding others first. Compassion is a great characteristic that's in the God category that we can have today. If you would, sometime this week, just do a search for all the verses related to compassion, and you will find countless verses that will inspire you, both Old and New Testament. But I want you to get this piece of Nehemiah before you go today and how it relates to this Colossians verse. It concludes there in Nehemiah, but you are a forgiving God, gracious and compassionate that go together, slow to anger and abounding in love. Therefore you did not desert them. It has staying power. There's something about compassion that doesn't abandon ship, that doesn't abandon others. It says, I'm in the boat with you. If this is going down, I'm going down with you. I have a deep sense of empathy or sympathy with that suffering. I'm going to suffer with you. But really, to go through that list again, that scripture, there's forgiveness. God forgives. He gives a forbearance, doesn't he? He gives grace, which is kindness, really, right? In fact, that word is used interchangeably in its translation. He gives the emotion of compassion. He gives emotion. He gives time, right? He's slow to anger. Compassion gives time. Gives love. Abounding in love, it says. And he gives support. Comes alongside. Nehemiah says, you did not desert them. Now I want to go back to Colossians 3:12, and I want you to see those categories in this scripture as Paul is addressing a church that can easily be divided. It's a young church. As God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, here's how you beautify yourself, he says. Here's the beauty lesson for you. Clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience. How can we do it? How do we just put it on? If it were easy, compassion would be all around the globe. It would be everywhere. Compassion stands out like a light in darkness. And so, as we answer each other, what's that all about? We are challenged today to consider how to love beyond what may feel natural. That crowd in your head, in that second category of questioning, how can you extend grace, forgiveness? How can you give your emotion over to that suffering, that situation, that person, that issue? How can you give your time? How can you allow for time for realization? How can you allow for even mistakes? Think of what patience means. It's really not just time. Patience is allowing someone to make a mistake and even to find out themselves that they're making it. God gives love. How can we give love? How can we abound in love and not cut ourselves off from folks? And how can we come alongside go back. Those groups of people that we think are dumb, come to the wrong conclusions, the one who messes up our families, the one who destroys our society, our government, churches, our church, the ones who suffer, and it's all their own fault anyway, they're doing it to themselves. I wonder if we could be like God. Lord, help us to be compassionate. Help us to have a deep awareness and sympathy and empathy for each other's suffering. Help us to have bowels of compassion. Amen.